Hello.
Hey, hello. Well, what kind of background do you want?
You can do anything you want. If you want to be in this magical field, go for it.
Let me pick something that makes sense. That tree's in Zimbabwe.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Well, it's really great to meet you. I'm sure you hear this all
You
the
too.
time, but your work has been really influential on mine. I remember reading Brutal ages ago when I was in
Oh
graduate
yeah.
school, and it was like
Yeah, it's been out a while, hasn't it?
it still holds up. I still reference it all the time.
You know.
Can I ask you, did you teach at Virginia Tech?
I was a graduate. Well, no, I did teach there. Yeah, 1 year. Yeah, I was a what do they call it? Not even tenure track. 1 year. It was called a 1 year position.
I went to
No.
school at Virginia Tech, and I was looking through some of your older, like something from the early 90s. I said, gosh, did he go to school there or did he teach there?
I did have one question. Do you care about language? Like sometimes when I get going, I have rather coarse language. Does that matter to you?
No, it doesn't. You go for it. Good to hear some real people.
Good morning. I'm Brian Luke. I'm a actually right now I'm a church musician. I've been doing that for longer, excuse me. Excuse me. Longer than actually I was in academia, believe it or not. So I live in Ohio and I'm still doing writing. Uh, and before I went into church music, which is what I do now, I was in academic philosophy. So I taught philosophy, and in my research, I focused in on ethics and political philosophy, and did a dissertation on animal rights theory, which ended up becoming a book that came out in 2007 called Brutal: Manhood and the Exploitation of Animals. And so I'm still writing, but I'm not employed by academia. So the fun thing is I get to write about whatever I want. So like 4 years ago, my partner Barbara Luke and I wrote a book about Donald Trump because we thought it was important. It's called The Complete Crimes of Donald Trump, Part One: Crimes of Race and Sex. And I'd like to take credit for that book, uh, leading him to losing in 2020.
Good
I'd
job.
say I'd like to take credit, but it's probably not true because not that many people read it. So, and as I said, we live in Ohio, and I don't do as much activism as I used to, but I'm still completely committed to what over here, Corey, we call animal rights. I like the term animal liberation, but I'm very much used to the term animal rights
That's
for
what I'm used to as well. Yeah.
part of the movement. And your first question, if I remember, what was your first question? What led you to focus on gender and species? Was that it?
Yeah.
So there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is when I was an animal rights activist, much more regularly back in the late 80s and early 90s, every meeting I walked into was mostly women. So it's like in your face, the gender connection is right there. Um, I was very active in the late 80s, early 90s. I lived in Pennsylvania and Virginia and Ohio, and everywhere that I lived, I would search out the animal rights groups, and they were easy to find. There was always a community-based group. There was usually college and university-based groups, and there was no admission requirements. You just showed up, and they're like, "Yay, more people!" So I would walk into a room, and there would typically be 8 women and 1 man, myself. So gender was like obviously part of it. The other thing I noticed when I started thinking about where is the movement succeeding, and because it wasn't succeeding for the most part, because our goals were the abolition of institutionalized animal exploitation. That, I mean, very ambitious. We wanted to uh, get those institutions gone, and none of them were going away. But there were two areas that seemed to be having partial success. One was product testing on animals, and the other was fur. And I'm not saying those institutions were abolished, but they did seem to be knocked back, at least on the consumption end. by the efforts of animal rights groups. And those are both gendered institutions. It's like it wasn't hunting that seemed to be decreasing. It wasn't meat eating per se. It was fur and cosmetics testing. So that was the second, like, kind of obvious indicator that there's a deep connection between gender and animal rights activism and animal exploitation. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is that I was an academic at the time when I became a vegetarian in 1988, which was a personal sort of epiphany or conversion experience. I was a graduate student in philosophy at the time, and I was actively engaged in trying to figure out my own politics. I was reading Marxist philosophy and anarchist philosophy, and as I was studying politics and ethics, I also read feminist theory. And the theories that made the most sense to me were the radical political theories and radical feminism. And so, from an intellectual standpoint, I thought, well, let's bring these together, and started digging around in the literature. And there was a literature already of women figuring out how to apply feminist insights to these gender to these species issues of human exploitation of animals. So I read everything. I read everything I could find. Carol Adams and Marty Keel, Josephine Donovan, Laurie Gruen. There was a literature, but it wasn't so big you couldn't get your head around it. And the more I read, the more I thought these are the theories that make the most sense. These are the theories that work.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so it was both. It was both confronting gender right there in the activism, but also thinking and reading.
what was that like to be the only man in the room?
It was fun.
Yeah, it was all right, wasn't it?
It was fine. The truth is nobody nobody really ever commented on it.
Mm.
It's and in fact, Corey, people didn't really talk about gender at any of our meetings or any of our actions. We just all we wanted to do was help the animals. All we wanted to do was stop these abuses.
Mhm.
And we all were just sort of jumping in together, doing whatever we could think of. And so gender really came up not in our we did actions every month, Corey. We were constantly finding something to agitate or protest. We did direct action, we did letter writing, we did protests with signs, we did civil disobedience. We were doing actions every month on all the issues: hunting, vivisection, meat. And we were all just constantly working together. And it was never really an issue. It was more an issue theoretically when I was trying to figure out what the heck is going on. But it did become an issue practically in certain key kind of stress moments. You probably remember some of those. The big one was the I'd rather go naked than wear fur campaign that PETA put together. I guess it was in the late 80s. Um, and the people who were working on the feminist side of this reacted to that and objected to it for good reason. And it got tense because PETA was not responsive, it was not receptive to those criticisms at all. Um, so there were moments when the gender issue came up, and it was always in my head. Like when I would go to an action against, let's say, hunting, it was almost all men that were hunting, not entirely, but most. So I was thinking about gender, but we didn't really talk about it in our groups.
In your book, you start off, I think, discussing the pigeon shooting contest in Pennsylvania, and you note how really marked the gender difference is, and who's doing the harming and who's doing the saving.
It's really remarkable. It's like they were representing gender almost. It was like they were creating gender in the roles of the event. This was a big public event in Pennsylvania that went on for 3 days. I think it was over Labor Day weekend, but I'd have to look it up. It was over some holiday. And there were 10,000 people that came. but the point, Corey, is that's so interesting. It wasn't just the participants that were acting out through these gender roles. It was us too. It was the activists. It was mostly women that were there. It was the women that were going out onto those shooting fields and freeing those pigeons and being arrested one after another all day. Hundreds. There were a few men, and men were certainly welcome. There was no tension about that or question. But it was women who were doing the work.
Mm.
And so, of course, I was thinking about like, why is that? What is going on with why aren't men joining this movement when it's so obvious that these abuses are horrific and unnecessary?
Yeah, and then in here in the UK, it's almost all men who are doing the hunt sabbing. So I recently reviewed a book from it was a guy who's from Ireland and he did a lot of the hunt sabbing in the 1980s. And I was just reading through it. It was just like the all this macho posturing, and I didn't really see much of any women's contributions. So it's sort of a complete reversal. And he used a lot of war language as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Like you can find pockets here too in the US where that uh that that female gender dominance is not true. And I'll tell you where one of the places it was in the academic side.
Yeah.
When I would go to philosophy conferences and there
Oh,
might
yeah.
be a session on animal rights or something, it would be mostly men. And that's where sort of some of my uh, theoretic work comes out of is why is that? Why are Tom Reagan and Peter Singer considered the founders of the movement when the at least in my direct experience of the action, it was the women that were doing the work.
Yeah. Why do you think that?
Well, it, that's kind of why I wrote the book I wrote to answer that question. I really feel that I don't know how far you want to go into this, but it has to do with how we feel that we must justify our actions, and it we can't simply go out and say I want to stop animal abuse. We have to explain to people why we're doing this, and the typical way we do that is through some sort of academic discourse, and
Mm.
that, of course, was still male dominated back at that time. It may be that philosophy is 50-50 men and women now. I don't know. I haven't really been around that. Uh,
Philosophy is still notoriously male-centered.
No, so it has to do with that, I think, Corey, that there it's the legitimation part. We have to put a good face on this, you know, and that was done through academic arguments, which were uh, largely men in philosophy departments.
And I've been looking through the Marty Keel archives, and it's been really eye-opening. So she's doing a lot of that work in the 1980s and 90s and trying to write about ecofeminism. And some of the reviews, she's kept the reviews in her archives, and this really vitriolic responses from these established environmental ethicists, just really going for and really going, not just for her, but against women and feminism more broadly. And it's just really shocking to see that in these professional spaces, that kind of response to feminist work.
Yeah, I mean, you could go down into that side of it too, the sexist side of who gets to present arguments, who gets to create legitimation. I do think things are changing. I am still connected with academia in various ways, and even though I'm not employed there, but I would have to go discipline by discipline to see where are there more women now than there used to be 30 years ago.
Yeah, one of my very best friends is does animal ethics and philosophy, and so that's kind of my inroads into the philosophical realm, I suppose. And she just tells me all kinds of horrible stories she's had to deal with, just like even just interpersonal harassment. It's just
Just
been
recently, even like not just
sorry.
not just in the past, but even recently.
Yeah. Because it's just, I mean, it's sort of a toxic situation. It's like an all male environment. Well, now she's a tenured professor, so I think she's in a bit more of a safer space. But yeah, and I can even remember I took an animal ethics class with Bernie Rollins back maybe 10 years ago. And it was just, I felt Well, in the end, we could shake hands. We were good
Uh,
friends. But in the actual class, have you met him in person? He was a intimidating dude, and he did not hold back. He would like really let me have it, and I could admit this now because he's dead and he'll never know. But I would sometimes leave that his class and have to go in the stairwell and like cry. I was just so he just made you feel so small, and you could see like a chilling effect around the this was in graduate school, by the way. It's just see the chilling effect with everyone else to just be afraid to ever challenge or question or anything.
yeah.
You just get shouted down.
You know what's so interesting about that is um, this was not like the dominant theme in my writing, but it was definitely in my mind that there was a sort of a male style of doing academic work, of doing teaching and giving papers, and particularly in philosophy. I thought of it as almost like a warrior. Like what we were taught in academic philosophy was to attack each other.
Yeah.
And I'm not picking a, I'm not making up that word. That's
Mm,
the word that was used,
mm,
attack. So I did think about that a lot. I did think about why do we talk this way? Why is it adversarial
mm.
in the seminar room? And now when I do take seminars still, Corey, because in Ohio it's a statute that all courses at public universities must be offered for free to anybody who's 60 and up. So when I turned 60, I started availing myself of that, and I've taken a number of seminars that are interesting to me. And it was shocking to me how cowed a lot of the graduate students are still. I was thinking in my mind, I was projecting 30 years of progress. And the graduate students sit there with their heads down. I'm talking about doctoral students.
Yeah.
The hierarchical system, and it's not very pleasant, and it's not altogether cooperative. So that's a lot that you brought up with one little side question.
Yeah, but I think it's an important background for I think a lot of people who aren't in academia, but in the activist space, like people are very informed, especially by philosophy. That's probably one of the dominant sort of disciplines that forms animal rights today. And I think if you're not in academia and you haven't had to go through that, you may not be aware of those inner politics that certainly shape it. And like bless Marty Keel for saving like that for me. You'd want to any bad review or nasty, you just want to throw it away, but she saved them so that people like me can go
Yeah,
back and see like what she had to deal with just to get through. So it's
it's not
important to know.
it's not good, and it's actually almost like I'm starting to remember stuff as we talk about it. And I don't want to give the impression that like women don't fight with each other. That's obviously not true, or that women can't get domineering or nasty. That's not true. I'm just saying that these things intersect,
Mm,
the gender and these academic norms that are not especially helpful or healthy, they do intersect.
mm.
I've had women in academia that have been pretty domineering and nasty, but I would say a lot of men too.
Yeah,
And
well,
it
yeah,
was men that
well,
created the model. It was men that built this
yeah.
institution.
Right. So there's a socializing effect for sure for a lot of women. Well, how do you think that a lot of this translates in the animal rights movement? What are some of the challenges that you see facing animal rights today, or even historically, since now you've got the 30 years you've mentioned of
Yeah,
to reflect?
I would divide it into two questions. I do think the challenges are different. Let me talk historically first.
Mm,
I think that my experience of the movement, I'm talking about the activists now, not the theorists, was that we were not political. We just simply were not. It's hard for me even to remember activists I worked with that weren't also academics. Just there were a few animal rights people that were also political, and they were usually like these vegan punks, anarchists. Okay, so we had that too. But that was a small portion. Most of the people I worked with simply didn't think about politics, period. So don't think of it as a left right thing. It wasn't like that 30 years ago. It just like America today, most Americans today do not think about politics. They don't think about systems,
Hmm.
structures, institutions. Everybody's encouraged in this society to just sort of get your family going, get your career going, and then go tailgating on the weekend. And that's considered the good life. It's not an engaged society. So I think that was a real drawback for the movement. Like we had a very simplistic model, Corey, of how it works. We all had our personal epiphanies. I don't remember any activist that was born and raised vegetarian. We all came to it individually through some sort of a conversion or epiphany, including myself. And we assumed if we just present the information, everybody else is going to have the same epiphany, and then these institutions will be abolished. That was our model. It was really, really simple. And I think that I believed it too for years. It took me years of disillusion to realize it doesn't work like that. People don't just change their minds because you're telling them or asking them or inviting them to. And this has been reinforced by the politics of the United States over the last 15 years or so. Um, People on the right, it doesn't matter what you tell them about Donald Trump, they're not going to change their minds, period. But that was our model. So I think that was a real um, limitation of the movement. We weren't savvy. We weren't strategic. We were just out there. We were just like
Yeah.
busy little bees, uh, picking up one action after another with no grand plan other than if I just tell people how badly these animals are treated, they're gonna all come to our side. Um, so that was a limitation to the movement then. I think today the boy, it's such a big question. I'll just try to keep it somewhat contained. The one of the limitations today, possibly that I'm pondering, is an advantage we had 30 years ago that I don't think is present today. We still had the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, all those great mass movements of the 60s were still in our heads. Oh my gosh, I was in 1968, I was 6 years old. Okay, so 68 through 72, all that activism, I was growing up during that.
Hmm.
I wasn't engaged in it, but by the time I was an activist, we all had positive memories of that. It was constantly in our rhetoric, in our tactics. We drew on it, the way that we built actions and the hope that we had, Corey. We are all so hopeful. I think it was because we were still within arm's reach of the civil rights movement of the 60s. And I don't think young people today have that anymore. And that's a loss. And I don't know, that's just something I've recently been pondering. Like, what's it like to be a young activist today where people they don't remember the 60s?
And then, of
So
course, it moved to digital, where a lot of the activism has moved online. And I think here we had a few spurts with some student climate activism, but I've just noticed since moving here, like year after year, it's just there's no student appetite really for any kind of serious protests. It's just everyone's just
it's sort of like petering away, and it's just sad and discouraging, and that's one thing I'm starting to think about. But really, the I think the real answer to your question of what are the barriers? The barriers are patriarchy and capitalism. Okay, the reason that we didn't succeed when I was so thoroughly engaged in activism 30 years ago is not really because of us. You could point to things that we didn't do so great or things that could have been better, but it's really the system itself is always the biggest barrier. Patriarchy and capitalism. In capitalism, everything is seen as a resource. Everything other than the white male rich property owners at the top. They get to be subjects. Everything else is designated as some sort of a resource. So that's, of course, land, animals, but also people. Human beings are seen as sources of breeding if you're female, or as labor if you're anybody else. Um, so that's the huge barrier to animal rights actually working, is this machine that we've created over the last however many years that is insatiable for continuing to build profit centers and extract money. Um, so we're still up against that. That's the biggest barrier. And then on the patriarchy side, that's very interesting because there's a lot of change there, because the origin of patriarchy, in my view, is in agriculture, and
Hmm.
the need to or the desire was never really a need. The desire to breed a certain number of people as laborers and make sure you keep track of which father they belong to. So you have all kinds of control of women's sexuality. And we don't live in an we don't live in an agricultural society anymore. And we don't live in a society where the best way to tell if you're the father is by keeping the woman in the home all day. We have paternity tests now, and we have what, 3 or 4% of the population doing agricultural labor. So patriarchy is, of course, a barrier to what we're trying to do, because men still express their masculinity through eating meat. But patriarchy is in a very different place than it was 100 or 200 years ago. It's continuing through ideology now, not through the economic needs of agriculture.
Hmm.
So that's the barrier, and but it's not an insuperable barrier, because the economy doesn't really need it the way it used to. Does that make sense?
That's an interesting way of looking at it, actually. It's
It's
hopeful way.
That's how I see it. It doesn't mean that it's an easy nut to crack, but it's different. The challenges are different. That's why, once you had the birth control pill and now you have paternity tests and so on, all kinds of things open, and people not living through agriculture either.
Mm.
Um, Materially, if you want to put it that way, economically and materially, the need for patriarchy is pretty much entirely gone. So the question is, why does it continue? And I think the answer is because men want it to. That's it. It's not imbricated in the economy anymore the way it used to be. It's still a barrier though, because you've got doofuses like JD Vance, who is an Ohio boy, by the way.
Oh,
So I take
sorry.
personal issue with him because I've been in Ohio a long time, and he's one of these converted Catholics who really seems to want women to go back in the kitchen, bring me my drink when I come home from work, and don't ever think about voting or running for office. And it's like, why do you want that? Oh yeah, because you're the one on top, you know. So we still have patriarchy, but it's it's built different. It's supported. The infrastructure and the undergirding is different now, and that makes me feel like there may be room to keep pushing against it, and eventually surpassing it and making it obsolete. Although I have to say, Corey, that I've been in this a long time, and it has been mostly a feeling of discouragement.
Yeah.
When we were active in the 80s, and I'm not just talking about animal rights, I'm talking about feminism too, it seemed like it's just a matter of time. I was worried. I was always worried because I always knew there were men that really wanted to keep this system going, you know, and I saw books like, what was it, Susan Faluti's book Backlash. I don't know if you've seen that. That was in the 80s. So we were aware of it, but we didn't know how resilient it was going to turn out to be. The ways of keeping patriarchy going, even when the economic substrate of it has completely changed. So those are the two barriers today, I'd rather talk about that than talk about like what are the flaws within the movement, what are the problems. I don't like uh, questioning other activists. I think we should all just pile in and contribute whatever we can. So let's keep the focus on the real barrier, which is capitalism and patriarchy.
I wanted to actually flow into the next question. You left off talking about how you didn't really want to direct criticism towards the movement, which is fair, but also I think an important legacy of your work, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, is that you are interjecting with a feminist critique that I would say that the animal rights movement has benefited from and continues to work with. So what do you think about that, I guess, but you can also speak more broadly to what you think your legacy is with the body of work that you've done. And if you want to talk about other work as well, and not just the feminist stuff that you
I,
think has been helpful.
yeah, I get your question. I um I feel like the what we were trying to do with that literature, with that area of theory was first of all understand it ourselves and then hand it off to activists for however it might be useful, whether it be like how the meetings are structured, whether let's say you have a meeting with two men and eight women, right? Don't let it drift into some sort of male dominant structure when it's completely that's it just makes no sense. But not just within the like the structure within the movement, but also um, understanding why some of these institutions continue. Remember what I was saying earlier? We were all just sort of worked up about the animal abuse, and there wasn't a lot of theorizing politically or otherwise. And yet, it became clear to me that this sort of ideology of male domination, or even just norms of masculinity, were driving these institutions. I mean, the most obvious case is hunting, especially in the United States. I don't know as much about it like in England. There are women who hunt here, but it's clearly a way for men to express a type of masculinity and to bond with their sons. So maybe we need to think about that before we decide how to intervene or how to engage, or even something as basic as, well, what do you replace it with?
Mm.
You know, as opposed to the style that we largely adopted, which I would call hectoring. We would show up events and essentially try to shame them. And I include myself in that. I would have pretty nasty signs. I would yell things at people. Um, so think about start with the most obvious case of sport hunting, but then extend it to things like meat and even animal experimentation. If you're really serious about opposing an institution, you probably need to understand how it's structured, why it continues, and have some suggestions for, well, what do we replace it with?
That last
So
part's interesting, the having the replacement, because I don't see that so much.
yeah, and I don't know the answer to that, but I do remember going to some actions, some sport hunting related actions, and it was so clearly about the men were so happy to be out there with their sons.
Mm.
And I have two sons, uh, and I'm very much a part of their lives, and I was when they were growing up. And that's one of the most important things in my life is having activities with them. Uh, so when I do see the work, the vegan feminist work or the feminist animal liberation work, however you want to put it, as trying to help the movement, as trying to provide resources for deeper understanding both of why these institutions continue, but also how should we organize ourselves.
Mhm.
It was really frustrating when people like Carol Adams were pointing out to Ingrid Newkirk that that campaign you're running undermines the movement because women are the backbone of this movement and you're undermining the status of women with this campaign. And for whatever reason, Ingrid Newkirk could not take that in. And it was just women who'd done a lot of theorizing who were trying to be helpful. We're all trying to make progress. um, I'm really hopeful. I'm still hopeful that that we can do this. That there's most of the theoretical work is done. We understand what the problems are, and we also have a lot of understanding about other ways to live together that
Yeah.
are healthy, that are healthy for the planet and for people and for animals. Um, so so that's what I think of as the legacy is we need to take advantage of the things that people have figured out, that people like Marty Keel, who really put her life into, and as you mentioned earlier, had to withstand a certain amount of abuse, uh, disparagement.
Yeah. I think they're
But
starting
we worked on.
we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. I was just thinking, listening to you, that the Vegan Society has a research a committee full of academics. I'm on there as well, but they will reach out to us and say, what do you know about this topic? And so they, like last year, they released a report on veganism and masculinity. And I think we need more of that, like you said, bridging academia and activism, so that we're not just, as you say, getting wound up and flailing around, but being more strategic.
And all of that is really encouraging, isn't it? And some of it is not even that hard, and a lot of it is really fun. There's if you're worried about models of masculinity because you're saying we want hunting to go away, and guys are like, oh my gosh, how do I be a man? Well, all you have to do is find some skinny vegan guy and point to him and say, that's a man. And that's a great man. And he's having a lot of fun and he's healthy or whatever. You see my point?
Mm.
It's like we can build up other ways of being men and women, and enjoy doing that. Andrea Dworkin talks about this. She's one of my biggest influences. I've read everything that she wrote, and uh, I can't remember which book it was, but she talks about how fun sex can be that's not based on domination, how much pleasure there can be in that. And I think that's part of it, not just pointing out how fun and enjoyable a vegan diet can be, but what type of man eats a vegan diet. I know a lot of men who are vegan because they're bodybuilders.
Mhm.
So there's just all kinds of possibilities. We just got to keep talking about it and pointing it out, um,
Right. I think
pointing
there's a
it
lot
out.
of counter movement. That counter movements get to shape this a little bit more than we even do. When they say, oh, the vegan guys are wimps, or the vegans are killjoys, or that radical feminists or anti-sex or whatever. So they're defining and actually closing us into these categories when we're not actually, as you say, taking the opportunity to explore the alternatives and build up the positive alternatives. Yeah.
I've known a lot of men in my life, and I remember some of the men that came out to the movement to do actions, and no one would ever have held them up as a model of masculinity under the old imagery, if you think of it that way, right? But I do, and it's really not that hard to talk about. You know, think about the bravery of somebody who just shows up at an event. Most of the events we did, Corey, we were abused.
Yeah, of
People yelled
course.
insults at us, people ignored us, and it takes a certain kind of intrepid determination to keep showing up. Those are the people I admired. Men who are gentle. Those are the men that I admire. I don't always live it up to myself, but I'm getting a little better over the years at being gentle.
Fair enough. So my last question for you, however you choose to answer this, what is vegan feminism to you?
Well, I actually sent you a note about this question. This is the one I'm like, I don't know what you want for this. So I have thought about it, and the one word answer is it vegan feminism to me means hope.
Hmm.
It really does, because I look at the world and I look at the risks that we're facing with capitalism and patriarchy both, the sort of way that we're like in this headlong rush towards self-destruction. It's really kind of incredible with the technological sophistication we have, the wealth that we have as a planet, and that we're not fixing the two biggest problems, which is nuclear war and environmental destruction. We have the means to take care of both of those, and we're not doing it. And the obvious answer to why we're not is because these systems that we have in place don't want to. They don't want to fix it. Patriarchy and capitalism. So when I feel like the discouragement of that and the fear of that, I'm like, well, what else is there? And then I think, well, there are all these other models. And the vegan feminists, whether they're activists or writers or whatever, are just presenting them. The work is going on. It's ready to hand. There are other ways that human beings can live. Maybe we've never done it under this level of technological development before, right? When you think about, say, matriarchal cultures, you're thinking maybe a long time ago and maybe more of a foraging or gathering type culture. But that doesn't mean we can't do it. We can do it. And I think we have to do it. I think the men who developed patriarchy have proven themselves to have failed at that experiment because of where we've ended up. I'm sorry to put it this bluntly, but we're raising people now with the expectation that the world may end in their lifetimes. That means to me that system is a failure. We shouldn't have to live like that. We shouldn't have to grow up worrying that climate change may go off on some positive feedback loop and cook the planet, or that countries might go to war and blow up so many bombs that the atmosphere is polluted. There's no reason to live like that. So how do we get out of it? Well, that's what vegan feminism is doing. That's an alternate model to capitalism and patriarchy. So that's where I look for hope, both the writings and the activism and the people.
That's well put. I really appreciate that this interview has been not just reflective, but also future oriented. And you've been really pushing radical imaginations and new alternatives. And someone said this to me once. It was AFCO. She said to me, we spend so much time as theorists criticizing and breaking things down. We don't usually spend the effort to turn around and think, well, what are we going to build instead? So I think there's a lot of room to start.
The time is coming. The time is coming because things are cracking. It has been a little, as I mentioned earlier, it's been a little discouraging to see blowback, to see regression. But things are definitely moving. And that's why I really appreciate the people who have put their lives into these efforts to say we can live better. That's who we're going to be turning to. And including, the work you're doing right now. I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of this.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.